Hello and welcome back to Write America, a literary series spearheaded by our friend and author, Roger Rosenblatt, in an effort to bridge the great divide in our country through readings and conversations from award-winning, nationally renowned authors and new and emerging writers. My name is Lauren. I am the publicist over at Book Review and your host for the evening. If those of you are not familiar with our store, Book Review is Long Island's largest independent bookstore in business since 1977. We have a fantastic episode in store for you all this evening, featuring readings from writers Lloyd Schwartz and Priya Jain. So if you missed last week's episode with Carlos Fonseca and Rose Styron, or any of the previous episodes of Write America, you can go to Book Review's Crowdcast channel at any time to watch the recordings. This episode is also going to be recorded, so if you happen to miss anything, you can always go back and watch the replay. Now, on another note, the Fulbright Association is celebrating its 75th anniversary by honoring Roger Rosenblatt, a former Fulbright himself, with a Zoom interview this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Roger is going to be talking about his long career as a writer and his book, Cold Moon. So you can register to watch the program online at Fulbright75.org. And I will go ahead and drop the link in the chat once the readings get underway, just in case you want to register. Now, before we get started with the readings, there's just a couple of things that I would like for you all to know about Crowdcast tonight, if this is your first time here with us. First, there is a button right below here. If you click that button, it'll bring you right to bookreview.com, where you can purchase signed copies of Lloyd Schwartz's books. And then there's also the Ask a Question button right down here. If you have a question for Lloyd or Priya during the event, you can just drop it down there and we'll get to the questions at the end of the event. And of course, I see that some of you have found the chat. Please talk amongst yourselves, discuss the readings, and of course, drop your emoji applause there. And I think that that's about it. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Our first reader tonight is Lloyd Schwartz. Lloyd is a longtime classical music critic for NPR's Fresh Air, scholar and editor of the works of Elizabeth Bishop, and the current poet laureate of Somerville, Massachusetts. Among his awards are NEA and Guggenheim Foundation fellowships for his poetry and a Pulitzer Prize for his criticism. His poems have been selected for the Pushcart Prize, the Best American Poetry, and the Best of the Best American Poetry, and he has a new book of poems coming out later this year. So please welcome Mr. Lloyd Schwartz. Hi, Lloyd.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you so much. And thank you and Book Review for having me. And thank you, Roger Rosenblatt, for starting this series. I'm really honored to be a part of something that's all about the humanizing effects of writing. The way all of these readings so far have demonstrated with such energy and vitality the way the values that repudiate the sources of division in this country and show us how much connection is still possible. In tribute to that impulse, the poems I'm going to read this evening all have to do with people finding, or at least trying to find, connection by actually speaking to each other. So my own title for my part of the reading is Speak America. And I'm going to start with a poem that is a dialogue between two people, and it's called Who's on First? You can be so inconsiderate. You are too sensitive. Then why don't you take my feelings into consideration? If you weren't so sensitive, it wouldn't matter. You seem to really care about me only when you want me to do something for you. You do too much for people. I thought you were going home because you were too tired to go with me to a bar. I was, but Norman didn't want to come here alone. I'm awfully tired. Do you mind taking the subway home? Silence. You could stay over. Silence. I'll take you home. Silence. Why do we have sex only when you want to? Because you want to have sex all the time. Relationships work when two people equally desire to give to each other. Relationships rarely work. Do you love me? Of course, but I resent it. Why aren't you more affectionate? I am. Couldn't we ever speak to each other without irony? Sure. I love you, you know. Yes, but why? Do you resent my advice? Yes, especially because you're usually right. Why do you like these paintings? What isn't there is more important than what is. Your taste sometimes seems strange to me. I'm a Philistine. A real Philistine would never admit it. I suppose you're right. Aren't you interested in what I care about? Yes, but not now. We should be more open with each other. Yes. Shall we talk things over? What is there to say? Are you ever going to cut down on your smoking? It's all right. I don't inhale. Sometimes I get very annoyed with you. The world is annoying. Your cynicism is too easy. Words interfere with the expression of complex realities. Do you enjoy suffering? You can't work if you don't suffer. But we suffer anyway. I know. Do you think we ever learn anything? I've learned to do without. You're always so negative. I feel death all the time. Are you afraid of anything? Not working. What shall we do for dinner? It doesn't matter. Whatever you'd like. Why don't you care more? I do. And the next poem is another dialogue, and it's a dialogue between me and my mother. He tells his mother what he's working on. I'm writing a poem about you. You are? What's it about? It's the story about your childhood, the horses in the river. The ones that nearly drowned? I saved them. You told it to me just a few weeks ago. I should dig up more of my memories. I wish you would. Like when I lived on the farm and one of the girls fell down the well? Yes. I forget if it was Rose or Pauline. It was a deep well. I remember that story. Have you finished your poem? I'm still working on it. You mean you're correcting it with commas and semicolons? Exactly. When can I see it? As soon as it's finished. Is it an epic? It's not that long. No, I mean all my thoughts, the flashes of what's going through my life, the whole family history, living through the woe, the river and the water. I know. Will it be published? I have to finish it first. It's better to write about real life. That's more important than writing something fanciful. I try to write all my poems about real life. You see, the apple never falls far from the tree. I guess not. You're my apple. There's probably a worm crawling through that apple. Then it's got something sweet to chew on. Well, you're my tree. Yes, I'm your tree. You're an apple. I'm a tree. And the next poem um, takes place on an airplane, and uh, it's what I overheard on a flight, and it's called In Flight, and it begins with an epigraph from The Importance of Being Earnest. Did you hear what I was playing, Lane? I didn't think it polite to listen, sir. A big, hefty guy next to me, an even bigger guy already squeezed into the window seat. Big, pleasant fellows, strangers before this 3-hour nonstop domestic flight. But they've been talking away nonstop since before takeoff. Talking business, talking sports, China, India. My next seat neighbor might have been from India. Talking Cubs and Red Sox. They both love them both. Google, the euro, leverage, banks, bailouts, masters of money. It will change the way you think. Great deals and missed opportunities. Exxon, fracking, megabus, Amtrak, breakdowns, lost luggage, and missed connections. A good place to stay in Detroit. Neither Cheez-Its nor Diet Cokes inhibit the juggernaut. So much experience, so many theories, so much friendly advice. The urgent need to tell each other everything they know before the flight is over. The Indian fellow occasionally bumping my left arm in his enthusiasm. Exactly, absolutely. All they've learned and thought, pouring out, yet steering clear of delicate subjects. Politics, they know better than that. Or home, an hour into the flight, my wife has become ex-wife. No names, nothing about movies or television, no mention of any other book, no music, but thoroughly tuned in to each other. Exactly, absolutely. Handing over and taking in whatever they can in 195 minutes, like old friends, except not. As we begin our rough descent, A startling silence fills the cabin. One of them has drifted into sleep. Stretching to look out the window, I can make out farmland, roads, then tractors and cars. Some bumps, and the sleeper awakes. But the conversation is over. Shutting down, touching down. Each of us left with our own thoughts of arrival or another departure. Then the busy powering up of phones, the clumsy lowering of overhead bags. Jamming the aisle, eager to get off and on with our lives. No handshakes, no goodbyes, but separated in the crowd, and each with a little wave. They call out, Sam, Andy. I'm going to read two more poems, if I may. And this is a poem that's a section of a longer poem about a cross-country trip called Crossing the Rockies. And this is the section that takes place in the club car, and it's called At the Window. Aurora, Roseville, Magic City, Sweetgrass Hills. Where's your husband? I haven't got a husband. I never married. Winter Park, the icebox of America. Bulk antifreeze, Icicle Canyon. John, not now, not before breakfast. I want to shake this cold. Lovelock, Tunnel City, Tangent, Helper. I hate having people do things for me. Cutting my steak. I had a stroke, can you tell? Let's not talk about it. My late husband and I both came from these parts. Anyone ever tell you how the Grand Tetons got their name? Maybe I shouldn't. This Frenchman looked up at the mountains and said, "What big tits." Three Sisters Mountains, Missouri Breaks, Diamond Peak. I wonder, what's the regional specialty for the Donner Pass? Whitefish, Soda Springs, Two Medicine River. I crossed the head of that river and the mouth. Osceola, Ottumwa, Winnemucca, Truckee. I built that bank, the building. My firm did. Floor Systems Repair, Kish and Sons Electric, Sparks. We're the Crook Twins, Crook, just like the word. Commerce City, Nugget Casino and Hotel, Price. Child playing Trivial Pursuits. What's the president's official theme song? Mother, we're in the money. Pig capital of the world. Smelt capital of the world. Lumber capital of the US. Egg capital of the world. Apple capital of the world. I'm a congressman, retired. I could have run again if I wanted to. Too much flying back and forth, though. I don't fly anywhere anymore unless I have to. That's why I voted against the airline appropriation. Trojan nuclear power plant, Koch oil refinery, biggest little city in the world. It's the Weimar Republic. Geneva, Havre, Malta, Glasgow. We're both retired. Well, I've been retired all my life. We're newlyweds, actually, just celebrating our first anniversary. Fort Union, new time zone. Grand Junction. You should go at Mardi Gras. That's what everyone tells me, but I get so nervous in crowds. Isaac Walton Inn, Polish Museum, Emigrant Gap, Blackfeet Indian Writing Company. Come from Alaska, Ketchikan, going to Florida, sun's in Florida, Lake Okeechobee. Got some time on my hands, do a little fishing, meet people, talk to people. The Bar of America, St. James Hotel, Frank Pure Food Company, Franksville, Zelda's Diner, open. And I have one more short poem to read. It's a sestina, but I think it's the world's shortest sestina. And it's the kind of, I'm ending with a kind of archetypal dialogue. 6 words. Yes, no, maybe, sometimes, always, never. Never? Yes. Always? No. Sometimes. Maybe. Maybe never sometimes. Yes. No, always. Always maybe. No, never yes. Sometimes. Sometimes always yes. Maybe never. No, no, sometimes. Never. Always? Maybe. Yes. Yes. No. Sometimes. Maybe. Always. Never. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. And thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Lloyd. We are going to see you later for the conversation, all right? Hang tight. All right, so up next, we have a reading from Priya Jain. Priya is a journalist and writer whose essays and reportage have appeared in the New York Times Book Review, Oprah Magazine, Slate, Salon, Bust, and other publications. Her creative work has received support from the Southampton Writers Conference, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and Tin House. She is currently at work on a narrative nonfiction history of her great-grandfather's roles in the Indian independence movement. So please welcome to the screen, Priya Jain. Hi, Priya.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're all good.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Book Review. Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you so much to Roger Rosenblatt for inviting me to be part of this incredible series. I have to admit that when I first got the invitation, I was not feeling particularly great about this country, and I thought, really, Roger, you're gonna heal the divide with poetry readings, but I joke's on me, because I think this has been a remarkable series, and getting to be part of this group of writers who are reaching out into the universe with their words, and it's just an honor. So thanks for having me here. So I've been writing nonfiction for a long time, and as Lauren mentioned, I've been working on a narrative nonfiction history of my great-grandfathers and their roles in the Indian independence movement. And then last March, the world shut down, including the library, and I wasn't able to go do my research, and I didn't really have the bandwidth to continue working on history when it felt like we were living in the middle of history and so much was changing and so much was happening. And so I found myself writing a novel. So what I'm going to read for you tonight is the first chapter of that novel in progress. It has almost everything but a name. So if anybody comes up with a really good title, by all means, let me know. Sunlight stole into the bedroom like a small child. too early and touching things that didn't belong to it. Leia watched through her eyelids as it patted the loose change on the dresser, stomped over the clothes on the floor, and came to stare wordlessly at her face. She tried to ignore it, buried her face in the pillow, but she was annoyed now, and annoyance buoyed the body trying to sink back into the slipstream of sleep. It was a holiday, goddammit, a long weekend, a time supposedly for rest. Her husband snored his agreement. She breathed deeply, trying to wick away her headache, her aching legs, the general creeping restlessness. She got up and plugged her phone and padded down the hall, past the kids' rooms where their rival white noise machines, one set to rain, the other to ocean, produced a static tempest. How did they sleep with so much sound? Down the half flight of stairs, through the dark living room, to the kitchen, which she knew before she entered was still a mess from Thanksgiving dinner, even though she'd gotten a jump on it the night before. 2.5 days of cooking, only to sit down with her family for a single anticlimactic hour, an hour in which her younger daughter had made a snowman of her mashed potatoes, and her older daughter had complained about the chicken, and her husband had wolfed it all down, making appreciative noises, but without really tasting it, which irritated her in a different way, only to get up and start cleaning. No, holidays were not restful anymore. At the threshold of the kitchen, she stopped. The room was not the same as it had been when her parents were alive. The appliances were newish. Her husband had refinished the cabinets. And yet, on this quiet, dim morning, she had this sense of stepping back into her childhood. Like she could sit at the breakfast table and her mother would appear with toast. She gasped and teetered briefly. Quickly, she turned on the lights. On the sideboard was all of the crap that had come out of her daughter's backpacks. She picked up a first-grade math worksheet, cheery lines of apples haphazardly colored in, and wondered if she was supposed to save it. Leia's cell phone buzzed in her other hand, and she jumped. She dropped the worksheet and hit the green button on her phone. Before she had even put the phone to her ear, she could hear her sister shouting, "I found it!" Jazzy was practically singing. "I actually found it!" Leia's headache knocked inside her skull, and she pressed her fingers to her temples. She had set a place at the dinner table for Jazzy, hoping this year her sister would show up. She hadn't. "What did you find, Jazzy?" Leia asked. "The map," Jazzy said. "I knew it was a real place. I told you, remember? You didn't want to believe me, but I knew Mom wouldn't have drawn it if it wasn't real. She wasn't imaginative like you." "Jazz, what are you talking about?" Leia pressed the cool backside of her hand first over one eye, then the other. She had compensated for her disappointment by drinking too much wine, hence the headache. She left the sideboard for the sink and perched one foot against her calf the way her mother had done. She picked up a fork, scraped off dried gravy with her fingernail. "The map you have clearly forgotten in your hell-bent quest to completely forget our parents. Jesus Christ, Didi. Jesus Christ yourself, Jacintha. Did you forget it was fucking Thanksgiving?" Leia's irritation blossomed into rage. She forget their parents? She, who spent 2 days making their dads tandoori chicken every year instead of just shoving a turkey in the oven? She, who still lived in their family home? Was her sister high? Oh, right. Right. Jazzy was quiet. The air on the line crackled as if she were calling from far away. "Where are you?" Leia asked. "I'm trying to tell you," Jazzy said, more calmly this time. "You remember the map Mom left us." "Of course I remember it," Leia snapped. "I actually remember a lot more than you do, you know." She had been 17 when their parents had died, Jacintha just 12. It was Leia who had held Jazzy while the estate attorney read the will and turned over a lockbox, whose contents their mother had instructed were to be placed directly into the girl's hands. It had contained exactly 2 things, the deed to this house and a map. How could she forget her sister's strange elation or her own disappointment that there wasn't more? It always hurt too much, this insistence of Jazzy's that Leia was trying to forget something. Jazzy paused, and Leia could hear her deciding not to take the bait. "I've been trying for a long time to figure out what it's a map of. I know you think it's just made up. I know it is, Jazz. I remember Mom drawing it when we were little. It was like a map of Narnia or the Kingdom of Wisdom in the Phantom Tollbooth. It was just part of her stories." "Okay, well, you think that, but I always thought it was real, and, well, guess the fuck what? I found it. I mean, the start point, the place where the map starts, I found it." "No, you didn't." "Didi, I swear to God, I started reading the Phantom Tollbooth to Mira, at bedtime. If you had wanted to indulge in nonsense, you could have just come over last night and read it with us. Would you please just listen to me? We read that part at the King's Banquet. You remember that? When Milo gives a speech without realizing he would have to eat his words. You used to love that part. I'm trying to tell you, which I remember because I'm older than you. I remember you trying to figure out how the words, Your Majesty, ladies and gentlemen, tasted. And Mom said they probably tasted like cardboard because they were so stale. If you just come and look with me, like this bullshit of yours, Jacinta, is very old and very stale. Didi, please. Leia stopped. She knew she was being a jerk, but she couldn't help it. There was no question she could ask, nothing she could say that wouldn't validate this whole delusion of her sister's. And it was a delusion. She was sure of it. The air on the line crackled again. Leia squeezed her eyes shut as another memory of her parents rushed over her. The two of them huddled over the handset of the old rotary phone that once hung on the wall, their heads pressed together, shouting the news from America to the dearly missed back home, each phrase echoing across the line until it reached the listeners on the other end, and then the wait until the response echoed its way back. Leia sighed. Jazzy, she said softly, just tell me where you are. I'm trying to tell you, Leia. I'm right outside. Leia pivoted on the spot, expecting to see her sister looking at her through the back window. There was nothing there save the Japanese maple her dad had planted nearly 2 decades before, its blood-red leaves shimmering in the early morning light. Front door, her sister said, and then the line crackled and went dead. And though Leia knew Jazzy was habitually an abrupt hanger-upper, she shivered. Was she scared? Don't be silly, she told herself, but something in the air had shifted. She put her phone down on the counter and padded into the hall. She opened the front door and yelped. Jazzy was standing right there, so close to the door Leia couldn't believe she hadn't heard her from the kitchen, given how loudly her sister had been shouting into the phone. Jazzy smiled. She loved catching her sister off guard, and did a little jig on the deck, which, in her heavy combat boots, exploded the quiet air with hammering. Shush, you'll wake the kids, Leia whispered. Okay, well, come on, Jazzy stage whispered back, and turned to trot down the stairs. Leia could smell her sister's breath lingering in the air and wondered if Jazzy had been out all night. A ring of smudged coal lined her eyes, so Leia suspected the answer was yes. 1 second, she said, and turned back into the house. From the bedroom wing, she could hear the whole white noise and snoring orchestra still going strong, and hoped that meant her family would not hear her slip out. In the front hall, she grabbed her coat off a hook and slipped her feet into a pair of ratty deer foams, worn down from nearly a year of constant use. Dimple Auntie, her parents' old friend, sent her a new pair every year for Christmas, a tradition Leia hadn't appreciated until she passed 30 and became, in Jazzy's words, a slipper person. Outside, Jazzy was waiting for her in the driveway. When Leia reached her, Jazzy grinned and grabbed both her arms. I can't wait for you to see this. You won't believe it. Where are we going? Leia pulled her jacket closer around her. A breeze kicked up and led the row of trees next to the house in a round of rustling. In there, Jazzy said, pointing at the trees. The house Leia's parents had bought when they first emigrated to America, when Leia was just a toddler and Jazzy wasn't even yet a thought, rested on a half-acre at the end of a dead-end street. To the right, they had neighbors. To the left, a deep wood of mature pines, oaks, and hickories. When the kids were little, they played at the edge, too scared to go deeper than a small creek that ran a little ways in, which they would run about, pretending to be bears and wolves and coyotes. Then the city of Atlanta, ever expanding northward, sent bulldozers deep into the woods, and all of the wild animals, now homeless, ran out. No bears or wolves emerged, of course, though once a rabid, half-starved coyote had wandered out onto the driveway. No one had been hurt. Leia, who'd seen the animal first, had called 911. But the novelty of the situation had attracted various city environmentalists opposed to the expansion, and for days, groups of people with bullhorns and matching ponchos had held press conferences at the end of the driveway. The family house, and once even her father, who had gone out to fetch the mail at an inopportune moment, had decorated the metro section of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for a week straight. Leia realized she was standing right about where the coyote had emerged. She shivered again, and annoyed with herself, summoned back her rage. Jazzy hadn't even apologized for missing Thanksgiving, had she? Fine, she said, turning towards the trees. Let's go. She led the way, though she had no idea where they were going. When the sisters were young, they had only ever gone one way anyway, a journey made so frequently they had actually trod a faint path. Amazingly, that path made by those smaller shoes was still there. She wondered why she had never shown her own children this remnant of her childhood. How odd that it had never occurred to her to do so. Jazzy padded along behind her, silent save for the crunch of leaves under her boots. Leia's dirty slippers made little noise in comparison. And then, quicker than she had expected, they reached the end of the thicket, where the ground dropped a half-dozen feet to the muddy bank of a narrow creek. On the other side, the woods continued, she wasn't sure for how long, until they reached the highway. Leia stopped, and her sister, unfairly taller than her, unfair, Leia thought, because Jazzy was younger, came to stand next to her. Look, Jazzy said. She was pointing at a tree not 6 feet away, an oddly shaped pine that looked as if something big had tried to sit on it. Carved into the tree, but how? The bark was thick and craggy and would have resisted a knife, were 2 infinity symbols, a big one on top of a smaller one, with a perpendicular line joining the 2 together at the waist. The carving seemed to glow, although there was no light emanating from it or touching it. The sun's rays wouldn't penetrate this thicket until closer to noon. What is it? Leia asked, even though she remembered. This, her sister said, and pulled a square of paper out of her back pocket. Before Jazzy had unfolded the paper, Leia knew the squiggle of lines it would reveal. The thick, sure line of Sharpie, the thinner, uncertain ones made in pencil, the crossouts, and most intriguing of all, the strange symbols that punctuated the lines at irregular intervals, with this one, the 2 joined infinities, at what she had always surmised was the starting point. It was the map. Leia did not remember letting Jazzy photocopy the original. After they had received it from the estate attorney, Leia had sandwiched it carefully between 2 empty pages of an old photo album and put it away in the attic. But now here it was in Jazzy's hands, fuzzed at the edges, with Jazzy's own scribbles in red decorating the margins. How long had her sister been searching for this? They used to argue about it all the time, whether the map was real or not, but they didn't anymore, hadn't in years. How did you find this? She asked her sister, gesturing at the tree. When were you here? You haven't visited in months. Yesterday, Jazzy said. I came for dinner. No, you didn't. I did. I came and parked around the corner. I wanted it to be a surprise. But as I was walking up the driveway, she shook her head. I don't know how to explain it. I just had this feeling I should come here first. Okay, right, Leia said, but the eerie feeling returned and she didn't roll her eyes. Really? So I did, and I saw this, and I realized what it was. Then I ran back to the car because I had the map in the glove compartment, and I wanted to be sure. See? She pointed to the map and then to the creek, and yeah, Leia could see. The bend in the creek matched the bend in the map line, leading westward from the double infinity. By the time I came out of the woods, I was late for dinner. I mean, I was late before I left the house, if I'm being honest, and I knew you'd be drowning your anger at me in wine, so I thought I'd better wait till morning. I slept in the car. Leia looked at her sister. On top of the combat boots, she was wearing tight black jeans, a black long sleeve, and a long misshapen cardigan. That's what you were wearing for Thanksgiving dinner? Jazzy sighed. Of course that's what you would focus on. It's just hard to believe, that's all. You never come for Thanksgiving. And then this year you do, but you just so happen to have been called into the woods by a mysterious symbol? Jazzy opened her mouth and then closed it. Then she opened it again. It does sound absurd, she conceded, but it's true. And Leia didn't know why, but she believed her. Okay, she said. So what do you want to do? Jazzy turned to look her square in the face. We follow it. Thank you.
I want to know what happens next.
A lot happens next.
Good. That was terrific.
Thank you so much. And I loved your poems. I had told you before we were corresponding before this event that your poetry seemed to me to cry out to be read aloud, and I think that was true. I really enjoyed hearing the dialogue aloud. I wanted to ask you, Lloyd, actually, how much of your poetry comes from like real heard dialogue and how much of it is stuff that you invent?
Yeah, well, a lot of it does. Um, um, you know, I think, um, and your dialogue is a real demonstration of this, about how beautiful talk is,
Mm.
conversation. And I feel like, when I fell in love with poetry, I didn't think I could ever write the kind of beautiful things that I fell in love with. Keats, who could match that? And it took a long time to kind of figure out, um, that there were other forms of beauty in language, and sometimes just in everyday and ordinary speech. If you worked on it enough, if you pared it down enough, and made every syllable count, which is what I try to do. I don't know if I always succeed, but I try to do that. And that there's something really poetic, and kind of beautiful in the way people talk to each other. So a lot of it is. I didn't come to that easily, and especially when my mother was really getting ill and losing her memory, and saying some just remarkable things. Um, I wanted to be sure I remembered them, and I started to write them down. Although they're a kind of memorial to my mother, and how she talked. But I was already doing that with other poems. I found in some way I could be most like myself when I was speaking in the voices of other people.
That's interesting. How so, do you think?
Uh, well, I don't know. I think I was getting very bored with my own voice in my own poems, and I'm not a fiction writer. Um, I tried when I was in college, but that I I I, I didn't enjoy doing it, and I didn't. I love reading fiction, but I don't enjoy writing it especially. Um, and I was very serious. I wanted to be an actor, and I was very serious about acting, and just becoming someone else
Mhm.
in some kind of mysterious way was, becoming more myself. And I don't know if I could explain it more than that or better than that.
I think I
Um,
understand that. I think I actually wanted to be an actor at some point in my life too, until I
but I
realized that actually being a writer you had a better shot at a career. Weirdly enough,
but don't you feel that writing a novel, working on a novel, is kind of, is in a way, if you can do it, that it's really liberating to come out of yourself, and not just be your own character in your novel, in your fiction.
yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I confess I've written very little fiction before this. I've written some short stories, but I would have said the same thing you did, that I was not really a fiction writer, um, until I sort of until I was, I guess.
Yeah.
I really felt the process of taking little bits of myself and putting them on the page and just twisting them slightly and turning them into something else, but actually using those true parts of myself as the material for shaping the characters. And that was really, really enlightening, to see how that happened for me, you know.
Can I ask, do you identify more with one of the sisters than the other?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if it's apparent on the page just yet, how you know, emotionally crippled Leia is, but I feel like she's like my worst impulses, you know, sometimes. Where I mean, I don't think she is a horrible person on the page, but I feel like I've imbued her with those the characteristics that I'm not particularly proud of in myself. So
well, you project that into a real character, and both of them really feel like interesting and complicated characters, and their relationship is interesting and complicated.
Thank you.
You do want to say you spent Thanksgiving in your car overnight in your car, and you kind of want to shake her, but then it turns out that she seems to be really onto something. And that she's not the kind of the flighty annoying person that her sister wants her to, or assumes that she is.
Yeah, I think that's, so often true, that the people that we discount as being unserious, sometimes the problem is just us not listening to them, and sometimes they don't warrant being listened to because they've been, so they've made such bad decisions in the past. And I think trying to figure out when to trust somebody or when to listen to them. I mean, it's so funny because this now dovetails into the broader purpose of this reading series. Just kind of connecting with each other across ideologies and ways of saying, and how do we trust each other? And then they have this history. These two sisters have this history. And even though they're not necessarily they're not talking about that history informs how they deal with each other, and their own feelings, their own grudges with each other, and their feelings of guilt, and their willingness to sort of dismiss each other. But they keep coming back together because they also love each other, and they need to be seen by each other. And so they keep looking for that and then pushing each other away at the same time.
Does the map play an important part in the rest of the book?
Yeah, so it's I don't know how to explain. I don't know how what we would call it. I mean, it's a fantasy novel, but it's set in the real world. And so it's not like a different universe. But the map essentially leads to these two sisters uncovering their parents didn't, uncovering the fact that their parents didn't emigrate to America for the usual immigrant reasons, for a better life, or but because they were looking for something. And then these girls, have to make the decision whether to look for that too. And it ties up with, I mean, like I said, I've been researching colonial history for a long time. So there's a lot of it that's just like a lot about India's colonization. And it's I wouldn't call it an alternate history because again, it's the real things that have happened, but it's injects some fantastical elements to explain how that real history kind of came to be. So I don't know if that's clarifying or
Yeah,
just more mysterious.
no. It's just absolutely fascinating. I just wanted to mention that there's a poem by Elizabeth Bishop called "The Map," and it's the first poem in her first book, and it's the oldest poem that she kept, and it always became the first poem in her collected poems. And if the map is really important in your book, maybe you can get a title out of Elizabeth Bishop.
I'm gonna go look in there for that title. Thank you, Lloyd.
And it's a wonderful poem.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, so we were talking about this a little bit earlier. You're the poet laureate of Somerville, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And I'm so curious what a poet laureate does.
Oh, well, I can tell you what I do. I think the idea was I'm the third poet laureate in the city of Somerville, and in case anyone doesn't know Somerville, it's a kind of if Boston is Manhattan, Somerville is Brooklyn.
That's where I am. So
and, which is where I'm from originally. Okay. It's a small but very densely populated town. It's the sort of bedroom community in the way that Cambridge has pretensions of being the intellectual and cultural focus of the Boston area. And Somerville is really the kind of the bedroom community. It's the most densely populated city in the entire state of Massachusetts. Tufts University is half in Somerville and half in Medford. And we've got a Legoland and a couple of movie theaters and nursing homes and a high school and 3 libraries. We don't even have a bookstore. But we've got a lot of really good and interesting poets. And I was sure we had that people in the city were interested in poetry, or maybe didn't admit to being interested in poetry, but might really be interested in poetry. So I have done several things. I started my term with a reading. I have to say, I stole this from Robert Pinsky. It was a kind of favorite poem reading, and that I asked people to read, including the mayor and the former mayor and the representative of Somerville and the state reps and people in politics and business and in all other walks of life. They were not allowed to be poets, and they had to pick a poem that was really part of their lives, that they always loved. It could even be a song lyric. And I organized a reading in which they read their favorite poem or the poem that was important to them, and talked about it. And I think we had the biggest audience of people watching and listening. I mean, this was before the pandemic. So we had a real crowd, and I think it's the biggest audience that I have ever seen at a Somerville reading. And then I wanted to do another reading, which involved the poets of Somerville, because there were so many really good poets, because poets can afford, or they used to be able to afford, to live in Somerville, even though they couldn't afford to live in Boston or Cambridge anymore. And then the pandemic hit, so everything had to be converted to Zoom, essentially. And the other thing that I did that I'm really that I'm very happy about worked out was that every month, with the sponsorship of the Somerville Public Library and the wonderful librarian, I pick a poem, and we have a Zoom session, and I call it "Let's Talk About a Poem." And it's sort of amazing how many people have tuned into that and have a terrific poetry discussion once a month. And some of them are poets, but most of them aren't. And it's just been great fun. I look forward to it every month.
It sounds like a lot of fun.
I have fun. I am a retired teacher, and this is the closest I can get to doing what I love most.
Teaching but not grading, which is the best part.
Teaching but not grading, yeah.
Yeah.
Or going to department meetings.
Yeah.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi, yes. So it is just about 8 o'clock, but we do have a question here. This one's from Adrian Unger, who is one of our writers who is going to be appearing soon. So this is exciting. This one is for Priya. You mentioned your conflicted feelings about life in the US of late. Have these feelings changed the narrative you've planned for your book and or enhanced some elements about culture, race, immigration, etc., that might have been more subtle before 2020?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. It's interesting because one of the reasons I made kind of a glib comment earlier about the library closing, which was true. The library closed. I have 2 little kids, and they were suddenly home with me 24/7 instead of being at nursery school and school. And I literally couldn't do my research. But also, I was sitting here at my dining table with 2 little kids trying to homeschool, and there are helicopters circling outside, and I can hear them. And, last spring was, just the most terrifying time I can remember. Not only were we in the middle of this pandemic that we didn't know we didn't know how this virus was transmuted. We didn't know who was going to get it or how we were going to get it, who was going to survive. But also there was an actual war going on outside in the streets between the NYPD and between protesters. And it was terrifying. And these helicopters were out there, and they were there to scare us, to keep us inside, and to remind us of the police power that was, always present, and that they could take us out at any time. And all of these things that I had never experienced in my, very cozy, privileged life before, suddenly became visceral. And all these things that I had been writing about from my great-grandfathers who lived in a colonial state, who lived with the ever-presence of plague, who were not, full citizens of their own country, who lived in a fascist state. I didn't know what that was like. And so I knew that I was going to have to revisit that in my manuscript. And part of, one of the relief of turning to fiction was that until I could wrap my head around going back to nonfiction to explore those things and figure out how those fit into my history, was to start looking at those issues obliquely, because all of that anxiety, all of those fears I channeled into this story of these 2 sisters going on this quest. But I didn't have to deal with them directly. So yeah.
All right. And let me see. I'm always curious, what are you both reading right now?
I am a huge admirer of the choreographer George Balanchine and the New York City Ballet.
Mm-hmm.
And I am just reading a new memoir by a former principal dancer of the New York City Ballet. So I am the perfect audience for this book because he talks about all the dancers and the choreography and the performers that I kind of saw when I was old enough to get interested in the ballet. That's what I've been reading poetry, just lots of poetry, including manuscripts by friends, which is one of my favorite things to do.
Oh, that's exciting. And what about you, Priya?
I just finished a novel called Gold Diggers that just came out by Sanjana Satyan, and I really enjoyed it. I was like, oh, Indian Americans in Atlanta having like a magical realism. I'm like, this is what I'm writing too. So I was like, I should read this. And I really enjoyed reading that. And then I just started a book, and I literally started it today. I read the first chapter, and I'm blanking on the author's name, and I can't believe it. It's called The Lost Book of Adana Moreau. I don't know if either of you are familiar. It's also fairly new, which I'm really enjoying. And it's also thematically interesting to me because it's about colonialism, and it's mostly about like South American colonialism and New Orleans, and it's set in the at least it starts kind of being set in the early. Now I'm gonna just ruin it, so I'm gonna stop it. It's like very that kind of like I feel like I'm like, oh no, I should have taken notes. But I was trying to take my mind off of the reading tonight, but I was like, okay, I'm going to start a new novel. So maybe I need to go back and reread the beginning of it again. But that's kind of my bailiwick right now is stories that are kind of take a little magical realism or fantasy and kind of combines it with colonial history or anxiety or immigration and things like that. So.
Oh, I think Suchita in the comments, Michael Zapata.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you,
Suchita.
I just have to ask Priya, where in Brooklyn?
Oh, Park Slope.
Park Slope. I was from Williamsburg.
Oh.
I couldn't afford to live there now.
I was going to say, when did you leave, Lloyd? Because I don't know if you would recognize it.
When I was not. Yeah, I wouldn't. I was 9 when I left.
We actually for Mother's Day, my husband and kids, we went to we were in Williamsburg yesterday. We went to Domino Park, which I don't know if you remember the old Domino sugar factory.
Oh yes, I do.
Yeah. And they've turned that into a beautiful sign. Yeah.
Really? Oh wow.
And that's gone. And they turned it into a beautiful waterfront park now.
Wow.
It's really lovely, but it's like now it's like little children running around this playground where they pretend to be the sugar going through the different stages of like being built and refined.
That's great. That's great.
That's adorable.
Great. Yeah.
Well, it seems that we've kind of run out of time here, but I want to thank you, Lloyd, and to Priya for being here with us and sharing your works. I want to thank everyone who tuned in tonight. And of course, I want to thank Mr. Roger Rosenblatt for pairing Lloyd and Priya together and for making this whole series happen. Don't forget to click the button below or visit bookreview.com to buy signed copies of Lloyd's books, and we and all of the other participating writers as well, for that matter. We hope to see you right back here next Monday at 7 o'clock for Readings and Conversations with Patricia McCormick, Michelle Whitaker, and Frank Langella. So we will see you then. Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you.